everyone. For this book review Wednesday, I thought it would be interesting to briefly discuss the famous John Steinbeck novel called Of Mice and Men. As you can see, it is relatively short, just around 100 pages, and it's one of those short stories that I think has sort of left an impact in particular within American literature. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of briefly discuss this one in particular and kind of go over with you what it is ultimately about and see if this would be something that would appeal to your interest in reading. And if you, first of all, enjoy very short books, then this will be one that I think you will like, in the fact that it kind of goes straight to the point, and while at the same time not really necessarily having a whole lot of focus, although it does intend to be a little bit more of a character-driven piece as opposed to a storytelling piece. But basically, this book revolves around two men, one named Lenny and one named George. George is sort of the mentor figure to Lenny because, as you will see throughout the story, Lenny is not all too bright. And he has a lot of difficulty sort of really socializing and has a hard time really identifying with other people and really developing what we would consider social sort of norms. He's just sort of out there, and it is not really expressed ultimately what condition Lenny has, but it does really emphasize this point that Lenny has a lot of difficulty functioning on his own, and he needs George a lot of the time, like he needs a parent to sort of guide him through various scenarios. Otherwise, he goes completely out of control. And this really happens towards sort of, I guess you could say, the climax of the book. And you'll sort of see the events that kind of unfold. And again, like I said, this is a lot more of a character-driven piece rather than a story piece. So ultimately, what we get as a resemblance of a plot is basically George and Lenny finding a job and meeting various characters along the way of going through basically the experience of having the job, because they go to a different location and there's a lot of sort of things that end up happening that sort of reflect the surroundings and the circumstances, and you'll sort of see how the other characters sort of impact George and Lenny. And basically, the story sort of plays itself out as a tragedy. This isn't designed to be a sunshine, flowers, and rainbows story. There's really not a whole lot of optimism to it. Even though there are optimistic things that George and Lenny sort of aspire to have, you'll see how they'll fall fairly short of those goals and expectations. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the fact that, again, Lenny has a lot of difficulty surviving on his own, and George is really not a upstanding mentor. Again, it's not to say that he's a terrible mentor, but he does really lack the ability to be what I guess we would call a parent to Lenny, because you'll see he runs off at certain points through the story and sort of leaves Lenny on his own, and that's really not a good idea. So that's really what plays into the kind of tragedy that ends up happening, is that these characters, in particular George and Lenny, have a difficult time really making something of themselves. And you'll sort of see how this kind of ties in with the time period of the 1930s, because that's when it's really kind of supposed to take place. And there was a lot of discouragement and loneliness and a lot of wandering too. You know, there's no these characters have a difficulty in belonging. Lenny, for his inability to become self-sufficient, and for George being kind of just sort of a bum almost, and not really living up to anything. And as a result, it's kind of shows you the things that were holding people back during this time, and how they felt like that there was no a positive end on the horizon. So that's really how the story addresses the themes. It places itself within the time period, and kind of gives you the feeling that certain people were going through. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with the fact that the 1930s weren't exactly as prosperous, especially when we had things like the Dust Bowl and huge, massive unemployment and so on and so forth. Those things, I think, really did have a huge impact into the way storytelling was presented, sort of similar to, you know, how films have that kind of same impact. So it really is highlighted in this book of Mice and Men, and you will discover why the title is that if you choose to read this story. But ultimately, it gets across, I think, what it wants to fairly effectively as a story. And even though it's not that long, it still it still manages to bring in a lot of depth to the characters, and you sort of do see how the time period, as well as the feelings of the time period, really play a role in this piece, and really are really contributing to what John Steinbeck was ultimately trying to say. And I'm going to be reading Grapes of Wrath after this, so I can kind of compare and contrast this book to Grapes of Wrath, which is actually a lot longer, and see if there's any sort of similar tones or themes, or areas of interest, like labor, because again, labor in the 30s is obviously not the same as labor in the 21st century, but I think it definitely is showcased here within this book, the struggles of the time period, as well as the overall feelings that people were going through. And I think as a result, it executes what it wants to. Again, is it a little unsatisfying because it paints itself as kind of too bleak? Yeah, I guess you could argue that, and I would say yes, that's kind of something that sort of bothered me throughout this story. I always like to have a little bit of optimism, and it was kind of sprinkling it here and there, but ultimately, when the end kind of punches you, it takes away all of the things that they were hoping to achieve out of it. And I also think that George's character really wasn't a really good mentor to Lenny, and I think didn't do his job, and as a result, you'll see how Lenny ultimately does bad things. And I think these characters have a difficult time in taking responsibility, and I think this often happens when people don't feel that there is any hope in their lives. Is they abandon any kind of responsibility. And I think this is really showcased within the book. You will see how it sort of develops over time with the two characters, Lenny and George. So that's, I think, though, ultimately all I can say about this book. However, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye now.